Hi everyone, we're starting week 4, and this week we go to the Jane Pierto book, and we're reading chapter 1, Creativity for the 21st Century. First off, she defines creativity a little bit different than Kaufman did in Creativity 101, as she makes the statement that it's really just to make something new. And a lot of you all had that same type of definition on our Flipgrid responses. And she also argues that creativity is something quite different than when Guilford was looking at was divergent thinking in some of his theories. She also goes on to explain the difference between convergent and divergent thinking, especially in terms of creativity, and that convergent thinking really is just to converge or bring things together, and we're learning what already exists. We are able to save that information to our brains and then find a correct answer. And when I think of convergent thinking, I think more of like standardized testing or rote memorization that we might have learned early in our school years. But divergent thinking really means that we're going in different directions, we're diverging. And this means we're going to revise what is known, explore what can be known, and build new information. And this type of thinking, again, is different than what Guilford was really trying to theorize, and that no one ever really found a good way to measure it. And we haven't really found great ways to measure creativity either. And so I think understanding what divergent thinking is all about will help us in this creativity class, that we are going to diverge from ways that we have been approaching what we learn. She also discusses a little bit about 21st century skills, and on page 3 she has a great table, and it's divided into 3 areas: think creatively, work creatively with others, and implement innovations. What I would like you to do, if you haven't done a response in your reflective journal yet, is to look at that table on page 3 and figure out what areas that you feel like you're doing well, what areas like you would like to expand or refine, areas that you hadn't even thought about as being a 21st century skill, not just for your higher education, but also in your long-term goals in your careers. Pierto also mentions that there's something missing when we're teaching creativity or we're thinking about creativity, that much of it focuses on the intellect or the mind, and little or no attention is paid to the physical and emotional aspects of a person. So again, this is another great opportunity to reflect in your reflective journal that is it reasonable to assert that only the intellect be included when discussing creativity. And if you think that physical and emotional aspects should be included, tell me why. Tell me what the impact to studying creativity or being creative in your own life would mean. I think what comes to mind for me is anyone who is a dancer or who is an athlete or partakes in something that is physical, that creativity aspect gets completely left out. It's not all in the mind as to how we learn new choreography and we're able to practice and then perform. Same way with athletic abilities, musical abilities. And there are also emotional aspects of the feeling that we get when we do those things, and if it motivates us to go further. So feel free to respond in your reflective journal. I hope that's kind of a question that will allow you to expand quite a bit. Something that she also touches on in chapter 1 is the core attitudes toward creativity, the 7 I's, and engagement in certain general practices. We will cover all of those throughout the semester, but she doesn't go into detail in chapter 1, and we won't either in week 4. She does talk about something called the thorn or the calling. And Carl Jung on page 6, it's a fabulous quote. I'm not going to read it to you, but kind of take note of that, that seizing of a human being. And if you agree with that or not agree with that, also could be a great place for reflection. I think we think of the thorn sometimes as that people who are creative have to suffer in some way, or artists are starving, and so on and so forth. The calling might be a better word for it. But I do want you to consider the imagery on page 7, between the rose and the thorn given by Pierto. And I really want to know if you agree with her description or if you disagree and why. And can you give another description that you think could be fitting in this context of that paragraph on page 7? You can answer that question in the week 4 discussion forum if you would like. She also discusses the motivation to create, and that the main cause for creativity is that the creative person wants to be creative in whatever domain he or she is working. And that's a quote on page 7. And so I hope you keep that in mind when you're working on your final creativity project plan, that I want you to pick something that you want to do. This project is wholly yours, and there's very little that I will say no to. But if you have questions or need some clarification, please send me a message so we can work that out. I also found a better graphic of the talent pyramid that's included in Appendix A. I think you get most of it here. But what I noticed is in the appendix is that you couldn't see all of those personality attributes very well in that graphic at the back of the book. So I hope that this is a little clearer, and I'll upload the PowerPoint so you can also kind of pull this off and look at it in more detail. So do you have a personality to be creative? Pierto has on page 9 this table 1.2, and she has a whole list of personality attributes. And what I'd like you to do, if you choose this topic for week 4 in the discussion forum, is to make your own list of personality attributes off of table 1.2, and then also include your story when I showed this attribute. And don't limit yourself to just age. You can go beyond that. You can say that I had this personality attribute, let's say resilience, when I was faced with X, and it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to your age. So feel free to take some liberties with the interpretation on when I showed this attribute. And if you're watching this PowerPoint and listening along, your personality, if you've never taken a Myers-Briggs type test, here's your chance. And if you have taken one, here's a chance to earn 5 extra credit points. This is a scaled down version, and I think it's fun and it's quick and it's easy. So for 5 points of extra credit, you can post your personality type in the discussion forum. You just have to include the acronym. You don't have to tell me what it means. But then I also want you to tell me, do you agree or disagree? And do you think it fits with your career? Do you think it lends itself to being a creative person? So feel free to add whatever you want on that for your 5 points of extra credit. And do you know your domain? Pierto, along with many other of her colleagues and some even popular books that are out today, suggest that about 10,000 hours, or it's about the equivalent of 10 years, is what's needed for mastery. And she goes on to say that formal study in some domains is desirable. It doesn't have to be every domain, but if you're going to be an architect, like I think she includes a car designer, there are some things that you do need formal study. And there's others, like the Quincy Jones anecdote, that he found the piano, he played all different kinds of instruments, he was a composer before he ever knew a key signature. So formal study is not always necessary. So a chapter wrap up here. So the thoughts and insights section on page 12 is also another great opportunity to have some questions to prompt you in your reflective journal. Not required. If none of this spoke to you this week, that's fine. If it did though, open up that Word document, label it chapter 4, and any of the items that I mentioned in this PowerPoint or this final chapter wrap up reflective journal prompts on page 12, feel free to do that. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me and I'll get back to you. Thanks.